In good weather or bad, we expect to travel where we want, when we want. But nature isn't always so accommodating. If she's in a fickle mood, she can surprise us with a sudden change in the weather. This invisible and mysterious force is the lifeblood of flight. It can also be the death of an aircraft. On January 13, 1982, Washington, D.C. had its worst snowstorm in decades. The nation's capital was shut down. Workers were sent home early. Washington National Airport was snowed in all morning, but reopened by mid-afternoon to the relief of thousands of travelers escaping to warmer climates. Passengers to Miami boarded Air Florida's Flight Palm 90, trusting their fate to a crew that investigators concluded had little experience in bad weather.
I remember before we finally got on the airplane that I looked out there and I didn't see any evidence that the pilots had done a ground check of the airplane, which I could tell because there was no footprints walking around the airplane in the snow, and it never, the snow still looked undisturbed. So that bothered me a little bit. I specifically remember thinking, I want to see somebody walk around that airplane before I got on it. I never did see anybody walk around the airplane. Those guys were sitting in their cockpit and talking about the weather in Florida, as I recall, when I got on the airplane. The captain announced, after we had tried a couple times to back out using the tractor, he announced that the tractor was incapable of pulling us out by itself, but I do recall that he used some reverse thrust to try to back us out. In the snow and ice, I thought that was pretty abnormal. And as it turned out, it was, because it had the effect of sucking up the storm debris into the engines, and I think that, I know now from reading the accident reports, that that was a contributing cause to what happened to us. I didn't think we'd actually get airborne, but I could feel us lift off the runway. The shaker was going, I could hear the dishes coming out of the galley all over everywhere, and I knew we were in deep shit. When we hit the bridge, it was kind of like being rear-ended on a freeway, and I said, Jesus, I survived that. And then I realized I was still heavily in motion, and the next thing I know, and we were tumbling, it seemed like, and then we hit something that seemed like 100 times harder than that first hit, which had to be hitting the river. And I blacked out, and as I was blacking out, I just figured that was it, so my last thought was, God help me.
Oh my God.
The plane had hit the 14th Street Bridge over the Potomac River, the main route into Washington from the suburbs of Virginia. Several cars were crushed by the plane's undercarriage.
The dark in that airplane, it was absolutely pitch black. I remember it settling onto the ground or onto the bottom of the river before I could get my legs free. And I remember swimming out over the top of the seats toward the back of the airplane. I knew I was out of the airplane when the light in the water turned from absolute black to sort of gray. And the contrast between having been in a nice hot airplane about 1 minute earlier, or maybe 5 minutes earlier, whatever it was, and where I suddenly found myself was just phenomenal. I mean, the airplane was gone. Everything was gone. Maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes went by, something like that. And a bunch of rescue vehicles showed up on the Virginia side of the river. And I remember saying something, hey, everything's cool. They're here, And it must have been half a dozen vehicles or so pulled up and sat, parked right beside the river there, and everybody jumped up, and there were another 500 people standing out there looking at us, and they just kept standing there and looking at us with their lights going and their sirens going and all that, and eventually I realized they had no way to get to us. And there were 10,000 people probably standing up on that bridge, or it seemed like 10,000. And they were all looking at us, and the irony began to set in on me that, you know, I'd survived an airplane crash and I was going to freeze to death.
75 people died aboard Air Florida's Palm 90 that day on the edge of Washington, less than a mile from the White House. Despite all the rescuers and all their technology, only 5 passengers could be saved from the freezing river. Flight attendant Kelly Duncan, Joe Stiley's secretary Nikki Felch, she would be rescued later by a National Park Service helicopter. Joe Stiley and Priscilla Tirado, whose husband and infant child never made it out of the plane. Priscilla Tirado was temporarily blinded by jet fuel spilled in the river. Numbed by the cold, she started to go under. A passerby, Lenny Skutnik, had seen enough. He saved her life.
Yeah. Everybody get behind the fire. You get behind the fire truck, all right? Get across there. Get across there. Run across the bridge on the opposite side.
Investigators with the National Transportation Safety Board began sifting through the wreckage, but what they retrieved only deepened the mystery. They found no signs at all of mechanical trouble. So why had the plane plunged into the river? True, the weather was bad, but other aircraft had made it through the snowstorm. Why not Palm 90? Then they found the black box, the cockpit voice recorder. The last seconds of this 30-minute audio tape preserved the desperation of the pilots as they realized they weren't going to make it. Mike McDermott is an independent air accident investigator and a specialist in CVRs, cockpit voice recordings.
The CVR indicates the general attitude of the crew as being one of disguised concern. There's a lot of joking around, you hear a lot of laughing, but the joking seems to be as a way of coping with the difficulty of the situation. Their nervousness in flying in snow may be due to their lack of experience. There are instances where they indicate the fact that the de-icing doesn't quite help them.
This is a loose battery on the front of the icing thing. They give you a false feeling of security, that's all it is.
They also indicate, and when they're going through their checklist and they're planning for the actual takeoff, they're talking about what they will do. How they will take off. They will apply power. They'll let the nose wheel come off the ground, fly to 500 feet, reduce the power. And their last comment is to reduce it to a certain level depending on their level of comfort, or as they say, how scared we are. So I think they were very nervous about the situation. They knew that they were heavy. They had a lot of passengers and a lot of weight on board, and the snow only added to their weight, and that caused them some concern.
By analyzing the engine noise on the tape, investigators discovered that the pilot never applied full power, even when the plane was about to drop out of the sky. They concluded, unbelievable as it seemed, that when the crew was running through the pre-flight checklist, they failed to turn on the anti-icing equipment.
And that became a very, very controversial issue when we listened to the cockpit voice recorder, and they went through the checklist and they said engine anti-ice, and they said off, but nobody wanted to believe that they said off. Why would they say off? And there was so much disagreement later on as the investigation progressed that the tape was again reviewed, I think, by the FBI lab and voice analysis, and some people just said, no, it can't be off, it's got to be on.
Did the co-pilot say on or off? Was the anti-icing equipment on or not? Sophisticated sound equipment can clear up the mystery. From the audio tape, McDermott extracts the co-pilot's response to another item on the pre-flight checklist when he says on. Alongside it, he places the suspect word, which he calls onf.
And after you've listened to this for hours, literally hours on end, I think it becomes very apparent that the second word is actually off.
The investigators' report concluded the word was off. Despite the freezing cold, the crew apparently forgot to switch on the plane's anti-icing equipment. An incredible blunder. Worse, when the captain used reverse thrust to back the plane out of the gate, he choked the engines with ice and snow. The probes that indicate engine power froze up, giving false readings to the crew. They believed they were taking off at full power.
The co-pilot apparently understood what was happening, and he desperately tried to tell the captain until the very last minute that it doesn't look right, and the captain simply didn't respond to it.
Now you hear that whine, that's the application of power. You hear them talking about their engine instruments. Say, this is cold, this is real cold. It doesn't seem right. No, it's not right. It's the same guy. Says, no, I don't think that's right. He's really concerned about this and it's not performing right. He sort of resigns himself to it and says, yeah, well, maybe it is. Okay, at this point, they've lifted the nose off the ground and they're flying. You hear the stick shaker, the da-da-da-da-da-da sound, indicating that they're not flying fast enough. They're about to stall the wing of the aircraft. And the pilot is saying, forward, forward, we only need 500 feet. That was the sound of the impact.
The Air Florida investigation was a milestone in the use of cockpit voice recordings to solve an accident. It also reinforced a message as old as flight itself.
I frankly don't know how much more you can tell people that you have to have a clean airplane. You can't have ice on it. I know the operations are complex, traffic situations, airport traffic, clearances, weather conditions that delay airplanes. I mean, those are all facts of life. These things happen. But at the bottom line is, when you got ice on the airplane, you're probably going to die.
On October 31st, 1994, American Eagle Flight 4184 took off from Indianapolis with 64 passengers and a crew of 4. Before arrival in Chicago, the plane was put in a holding pattern. Half an hour later, the ATR suddenly nosedived into a field outside Roselawn, Indiana, killing everyone on board.
When we got out there, it was total catastrophic destruction of the airplane. There was really nothing left. There were markers, and as you looked over the field, it was a 20-acre field. All you could see was stakes that indicated people, or what was the remains of people, and airplane parts. And the magnitude, to see that, I was standing out there thinking, I don't have much of an airplane to look at. I don't have much of anything to look at. We knew that the weather was involved. We knew that it had been windy. We knew that it was raining. We had people at the scene that were giving us that information. We also found out that there were icing conditions in the area.
Ice is a particular problem for turboprops. Normal jets fly at high altitudes, above the ice, and have heated wings. But the ATR flies low, right in the icing zone. It doesn't have enough engine heat to warm the wings, so it uses boots, pneumatic leading edges on the wings that can be inflated to break off the ice. The aircraft that crashed at Roselawn had been circling for half an hour in freezing conditions.
The crew, basically, they understood that they were in icing conditions because they could see it. They had activated all the ice protection systems on the airplane. And so when they looked out the window and they saw that the system was handling the ice, they didn't perceive it as a threat. And it was during the course of flying in this holding pattern on the last circuit, they had the autopilot on. The airplane was basically flying on automation. The captain had just returned from the back of the airplane where he'd used the restroom and got back into his seat, and the airplane rolled uncommandedly to the right. The autopilot kicked off and the airplane rolled substantially to the right, first being corrected by the first officer, who was able to regain control of the airplane momentarily, and then a secondary roll. And then the airplane went into a severe nose-down pitch attitude, from which the flight crew was unable to recover. And the airplane then eventually struck the ground at about 475 knots, or about 500 miles an hour.
The NTSB concluded that the ailerons, the little flaps behind the wings that let a plane bank and turn, flipped over all by themselves and put the plane into a nosedive. But why? Greg Feith discovered that the ATR had been flying in freezing rain.
You have a raindrop. It's called a supercooled drizzle droplet or a supercooled rain droplet, and it varies in size from maybe 40 microns up to 2,000 microns. Now, people don't understand what that all means. 40 microns is about the size of the tip of a lead pencil. That's how small it can be. Whereas a 2,000 micron drop is the size of a large raindrop that when it hits the ground, it splats and it turns into about a silver dollar size. Given that fact, these are very, very cold droplets. So they start as an ice crystal or a snowflake. They may fall in this cold band of air, then warm up and turn into liquid state again, but never refreeze. So you have a drop that is well below freezing, but is still liquid form. Now the airplane flies through the cloud. This raindrop strikes that airplane. Now, depending on the size of the drop, it may instantaneously freeze, or it may be a sufficient size where it'll actually start to run a little bit. It'll trail back until it loses all of its energy and its heat, and it'll freeze.
Could this phenomenon have something to do with the accident? To find out, the NTSB carried out an unprecedented test. They deliberately flew an ATR into harm's way. A plane in front directed a yellow spray of freezing raindrops back onto the ATR's wings. A chase plane recorded what happened.
What those icing tests showed us was that this airplane was susceptible to a phenomenon of an ice ridge that built up behind that protected surface, or that boot along the leading edge. This ridge of ice that was developed during the icing tanker test that we have photographs of, we could see exactly where it built up. It disrupted the airflow so much that it caused the aileron to move all by itself. And if the pilots weren't anticipating it, they didn't expect it, they didn't have their hands on the control yoke, this aileron would then move, causing the airplane to react. And with Roselawn, it happened so quickly. You had a 14-degree movement of the ailerons in a quarter of a second. That's a blink of an eye. Boom. And that airplane rolled 77 degrees.
Greg Feith's findings were officially adopted by the NTSB, despite vigorous protests from the French. They issued their own report on the accident, blaming the pilots, not the plane. But to keep flying in America, Aerospatiale redesigned the ATR's wings. Snow, sleet, ice. All send a chill down a pilot's spine. But even cloudless skies can hide a dark lining, as passengers discovered on a beautiful, deadly day in Texas. Many crashes once blamed on pilots are now thought to have been caused by turbulence. Only in the 1970s, after a series of appalling accidents, was the most lethal turbulence recognized and given a name: wind shear. Its most deadly form is called a microburst. A microburst is like a high-pressure air hose pointed at the ground. As the air hits the earth, it bounces upward and outward in every direction. Out of nowhere, the full horrors of a microburst were visited upon Dallas-Fort Worth, the second biggest airport in the world.
August the 2nd, 1985 was a day I'll never forget. It was your typical Texas day. Beautiful weather. You couldn't have asked for a more perfect day. And when we finished cleaning the trucks for that day and put them up in the stalls for the next emergency call, we're preparing our evening meal, and it's just before 6 o'clock. There's a weather warning comes on. The weatherman says we've got a severe weather cell at the north end of DFW Airport. And we're all looking at each other, knowing what we just came out of, how beautiful it was, and we're saying, this guy's got to be crazy.
For the next 30 minutes, Delta Flight 191 would endure the full fury of Mother Nature.
Boy, this is a very strong rain shower. Boy. You can see the thunderstorm over there on the horizon. But I think everything is fine. A little bouncy today, but no problem. Oh, yes. Everything looks fine. Checklist is complete, and we have been cleared to land.
Charlie Phipps, a Delta Airlines training captain, retraces Flight 191's ill-fated path. Using data from the flight recorder, his simulator is programmed with exactly the same weather Flight 191 encountered that day.
A little bit more turbulence than I expected. Glide slope, we're coming up on the glide slope again. Everything is fine. Seems like we're losing some air speed. The tailwind, yes, we got a tailwind now, a strong tailwind. Oh, yes.
Before we ran into the storm, you could hear everybody on the plane laughing and cutting up and, you know, just idle chatter. But as we got into the storm more and more, the plane got quieter and quieter. And finally, there was, you know, you could hear a pin drop in the plane.
Wow, look at the tailwind. We've got a heck of a tailwind here. Oh, my God. Come on, airplane. Come on. Come on, fly, baby. Come on, baby. You can make it. Come on. Come on.
Wind shear.
Come on, baby.
Wide slope.
Come on.
Spin 'em up.
Come on. Oh.
50, 40.
Its engines screaming at full power, the plane touched down in a field, careened across a freeway, snapping off lampposts, and bounced down on a car, killing its occupant. Then it entered the airfield at full speed, heading not for the runway, but for 2 4-million-gallon water tanks.
The rain was so hard that I couldn't see past my windshield. The rain and the wind was holding the windshield wipers back. They wouldn't even wipe the windshield. I tried to roll the window down to see. It was like somebody standing outside with a bucket of water hitting me in the face with it. It was that bad.
The NTSB completed its report on the Dallas crash, but for once it failed to agree with its own investigator. Rudy Kapustin retired before the investigation was complete, and his report was finished by others. To this day, he disagrees with its findings, that the crew were mainly to blame.
The crew, I think, you know, when you try to evaluate did the crew do the right thing and do the wrong thing, well, in retrospect, obviously they did the wrong thing, because they crashed. Can't say they did the right thing, but did they act prudently, based on what they knew, and continue the approach based on what they knew at the time? I would say yes.
Lightning coming out of that one.
What?
Lightning coming out of that one.
The members of the board criticized the pilots for flying through a thunderstorm and trying to land in it. On this computerized animation, reconstructed from the plane's own flight recorders, the black column the plane is heading for is the microburst. But the pilots had been told it was just a rainstorm, and that other planes were landing safely.
But there's always a reluctance, particularly if someone landed just in front of you. Everybody will say, American or TWA just landed, how come you couldn't land? The passengers will do that. They don't like to be late.
The consequences of that reluctance can be heard on the plane's cockpit voice recording. "137 people died at Dallas. Since then, the federal government has ordered wind shear radar installed at all major airports. And NASA has developed a device that can be fitted on a plane to give 45 seconds advance warning of wind shear, enough to allow the plane to get out of trouble. So far, only one airline, Continental, has installed it. But what no one can guard against is a bizarre and unpredictable ill wind that blows no good at all.
We have an airplane crash over here, just around Whitefield Park, or
Air crash detectives are rarely stumped for a solution. Even the most tangled heap of wreckage usually gives up an answer. But recently, the NTSB has declared itself mystified by two serious accidents. Both happened to the same type of plane, and in an eerily similar way.
What kind is it, Mrs. Smith?
I don't know.
The first occurred in 1991 in Colorado Springs, in the foothills of the Rockies. It was witnessed by a teenager with a video camera.
Okay, they're telling us to move the area. Because, sir,
They don't want anything touched.
what kind of plane is it? Do you know?
Small private plane.
Private jet.
Small private plane?
But this was no small private plane. It was a Boeing 737, the most popular passenger aircraft in the world. Of the 25 passengers aboard, not a trace remained.
I don't think that there's any survivors in there.
One thread ran through all the eyewitness accounts. A mysterious wind, powerful enough to blow cars around in a junkyard and knock buildings over in the night. Several people spoke of seeing a huge rotor, a sort of horizontal tornado, rolling off the Rockies. The NTSB was unconvinced. Rotors exist, but none has ever been recorded that can knock over a Boeing 737. And then it happened again. In September 1994, 3 years after Colorado Springs, USAir Flight 427 into Pittsburgh crashed in almost identical circumstances. 132 people died. At the NTSB, alarm bells began to ring.
Going to the accident scene itself, how surreal and quiet it was. It had just rained. It was very early in the morning, about 7:30, and we actually got to the accident site. The wreckage was still smoldering, so you're walking through probably the most incredible devastation I've seen in fragmentation on an accident site.
You can see it's not very far from the tail section.
Bodies up there.
Yeah, the first on scene was very unreal. Just taking a look around and then trying to find out where the various pieces of the airplane were, because we initially walked up the scene you couldn't see anything recognizable as an airplane.
I may be wrong on that. This is a pressure switch of some sort. Yeah, pressure switch.
It's a one of the leading edge slide actuators.
Rich, we got a slide actuator here. Okay, that's a Kruger flap actuator.
Be careful. Jesus. Should have come from the other side.
Could the ghost of a passing aircraft be as dangerous as the aircraft itself? Turbulent airstreams coming from a plane's wingtips are called wake vortices. Could they be lethal?
We took an FAA 727, put vortex generators on its wings. USAir provided a 737 that we instrumented with all the parameters we'd like to have for rudder pedal position, this and that, and went out and flew about 120 different wake vortex encounters at different distances to see how severe a wake vortex could be. We collected a tremendous amount of data. Some of it's quite fascinating. But one thing it did show is that the wake vortice would not cause the same yaw motion that we need to cause the upset.
A second crash with no obvious solution, unprecedented in the history of the NTSB. In both cases, the planes were on approach to an airport, turning onto the glide path, when they suddenly rolled over and dove into the ground. In both cases, the planes hit turbulence, strong winds at Colorado Springs, the wake of a passing aircraft at Pittsburgh. But in neither case was the turbulence strong enough to tip the plane over. To the investigators, it looked like the rudder was suddenly pulled hard over, something a pilot would be unlikely to do. Could the rudder have moved on its own? The USAir 737 was carefully reconstructed in a hangar. For 2 years, exhaustive tests were carried out on the rudder. Investigators looked for a microscopic particle that could cause it to jam suddenly. Until they find it, a question hangs over the world's most popular plane. Could it happen all over again? In tests, a tiny valve in the 737's rudder would occasionally jam. Then the plane would turn in the opposite direction to the one the pilot intended. Only releasing the rudder could cure the fault, but the pilot, unknowing, would push harder and harder, trying to force the plane to turn in the right direction. Disaster was inevitable. Aircraft can't tame the power of the wind any more than ships can control the tides. Scientists still know little about the violent movements of the atmosphere, what causes storms to grow or die. No aircraft can resist the worst Mother Nature can throw at it. In fact, she is largely to blame for 1/3 of all disasters in the air. Behind the clouds of tragedy, there is a silver lining. We hold a few more clues about how to detect trouble in the wind and how to avoid it.